Welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. When you get 4 wins in a row, it's pretty fun. But when you get that fifth win in a row in South Beach against the Heat, it makes a streak even better. On how the Grizzlies got their fifth win in a row via expected and unexpected sources, Steven Adams finding his groove, and a little bit less bad luck and some good health are finally helping the Grizzlies defense reach its potential. That and much more on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Hey, let's go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome once again to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name's Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having an outstanding start to your Tuesday. Of course, the Grizzlies last night in South Beach, they get their fifth win in a row. We'll get into all that plus some other fun stuff in this edition of the show. You can find myself at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz. My name is Shawn Coleman, credentialed media member with the Grizzlies. Have been covering the Grizzlies now for 4 years. Write about them over at Grizzly Bear Blues. Your host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. Of course, we want to remind you can find the podcast wherever it's available: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the Odyssey app. Wherever you choose to listen to podcasts, that's where we will be. Listen, review, subscribe. Also, right here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. Lets us know you enjoy the show. Lets others be able to find the show, and just in general makes the show the best experience it can be for everyone involved. Want to also remind you of the title sponsor for today's show, Truebill. Those unwanted free ads, those free signups that you do online or wherever else that are free, but unfortunately turn into opportunities for businesses to take money from you. Truebill is a great way for you to be able to control that from happening. Make sure you check out Truebill today. So the Grizzlies, they go on the road after a big win in Dallas on Saturday night. The Grizzlies were able to get their fourth win in the road. The story of the night for the Grizzlies on Saturday night was allowing for Desmond Bane to get a bit of revenge against the Dallas Mavericks for passing over him in the 2020 draft. A career high in points, career high in rebounds. Of course, the fun activities that happened at the postgame press conference, nothing negative. Just Desmond Bane, again, coming into his own as a player and as a personality and just making it known as to why he had a little bit of extra motivation for the Grizzlies to be able to get a big win, not only for them, but also the division, also the Western Conference standings. Well, while Desmond Bane certainly had a reason to look for revenge on Saturday night, the Grizzlies as a whole had plenty of reason to look for revenge when it came to visiting Miami and South Beach on Monday night. Of course, it was the game against Miami, the sixth game of the season for the Grizzlies to end October, where they were defeated 129-103. And I know there have been several games where the Grizzlies have lost by 20 or more points, but that was one of the more sound defeats that the Grizzlies suffered this year. And the reason why was because they couldn't stop Jimmy Butler, and they could not prevent the Heat from shooting threes. Well, coming into last night's game, the news was good for Miami because they were getting Jimmy Butler back. And though they did not have Bam Adebayo, they also were coming into the game having shot the three much better as of late than when they played the Grizzlies a little over a month ago. So it certainly seemed like it was going to be a tougher test for this Grizzlies team facing a Heat team that was playing very well despite being without Jimmy Butler. Yes, you could say that they were treading water, but the Heat were actually playing at a level. They were improving in areas where they needed to improve. So once they got Jimmy Butler back, they could really take off in terms of their success. And that was what was awaiting the Grizzlies last night. But the thing is that the Grizzlies once again dug in, and they were the team with control from the beginning. Another wire-to-wire victory, getting out to as much as an 18-point lead, I believe, in the first quarter. Though the Heat would come back, it was typical from what we saw in the Raptors game and also against the Mavericks, last Saturday night, is that the Grizzlies got off to a big lead, but they controlled that lead despite the Heat trying to make comebacks. The Heat did find, Tyler Hero obviously had another outstanding game, much like Tim Hardaway Jr. on Saturday night for the Mavericks. Tyler Hero did just enough to be able to keep the Heat in the game, but it was the Grizzlies who were showing the better team effort. The story of last night was the Grizzlies' starting lineup. And that's what was going to be needed with how well the Heat's bench had been performing as late. I talked about it on yesterday's preview of the game. I talked about how one area where the Grizzlies were going to have to find a way to keep the Heat from getting huge advantages was when Tyler Hero and the Heat's bench, as well as the Heat's reserves, had been shooting the three. The Grizzlies were going to have to find a way to either dominate when their starters were in or find some way to manage to where the Heat didn't get a huge advantage when the bench units were in. And for the Grizzlies, the key to it was they were able to dominate with their starters. That's exactly what occurred. Desmond Bane, over 20 points once again on the night. Jaren Jackson Jr., another solid performance. He wasn't needed to be the true difference maker. But Dillon Brooks, 20-plus points, 8-plus assists, 2-plus steals. Only the second time in his career he did exactly that. And that was the first unexpected source. Listen, we've come to expect with Desmond Bane that, you're going to get those 20 points tonight. You may not get it every night, but, 20 points for him last night overall. But the other big thing was that even though Jaren Jackson Jr. did not have a lot of involvement himself, it was Dillon Brooks who was the second one to come through with 21 points of his own. So you've got 42 combined points from Desmond Bane and Dillon Brooks. That's expected. You expect with jaw out, you're probably going to get 40-plus points out of Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Dillon Brooks. A duo out of those three every night with jaw out is probably going to get you the 20-plus points. But the key was that even though Dillon was 8 from 21 from the field, he found a way to add value on offense by creating 8 assists. Again, only the second time in his career he had 8 assists in a game. And every one of them were needed in this game to help the Grizzlies control the lead. So yes, Dillon had another night. Probably shot a few more shots than many of us would have liked, but he made up for it by being able to find ways to be able to make passes, create opportunities that did not seem to be there against a very tough defense. When you play a tough defense like Miami, especially a tough half-court defense like Miami, one of the ways to beat them is for an unexpected source of assists, an unexpected source of playmaking to step up. And that's exactly what Dillon Brooks did, and it made all the difference in the world in the game. That's how outstanding his performance was last night, even if it may not seem like it in the box score. The other thing that Dillon Brooks did was that he was able to hold or play a big role in holding Jimmy Butler to 4 of 13 from the field. As I had mentioned, the Grizzlies going into last night's game, they couldn't afford to let Jimmy Butler be a highly effective scorer himself while also giving up a lot of threes. And what the Grizzlies do, they shut down both of those things. Jimmy Butler only 4 of 13 from the field. I believe that he got a little bit banged up in his return from injury yesterday. Certainly hope he's all right. But the Grizzlies also held the Heat to 6 of 22 from 3. Though Tyler Hero had his game, basically what the Grizzlies said was that we're going to let Hero be the hero. We're going to let him do what he does, but we're not going to let anybody else step up and have a good game. And nobody else really did. And that's what helped the Grizzlies be able to not only take the lead, but control it as well. And a big reason why was Desmond Bane once again scoring 20 points, but Dillon Brooks not only being a secondary scorer, but a primary playmaker and also the primary stopper on defense. An overall very, very good game. Coach Taylor Jenkins said after the game he felt it was one of the best games he had seen Dillon Brooks play in his career under Taylor Jenkins because of the fact that Dillon Brooks was able to show his playmaking chops. And the thing is, this is now the 14th time that Dillon Brooks has had 5 or more assists in the game. 8 of those games have happened in the 2021 calendar year. So while it's not frequent, it's happening more often. Dillon, the playmaker, is certainly a very, very good sight to see and could be another added benefit for this offense. But despite Desmond Bane, despite the defense, and despite Dillon Brooks stepping up, the other big revelation, and a very, very needed one and a great one to see, is Steven Adams for the second straight game having a significant impact on the Grizzlies, both on offense and defense. And it is a reminder that, yes, while the Grizzlies have certainly had a great stretch here over the past few games, it's a reminder that though it did take a while for them to get going, that may have actually been a benefit in disguise. I'll explain in just a moment, especially when it comes to Steven Adams. But of course, want to remind you of our sponsor of today's show, Truebill. Listen, we all have these apps. We all love online offers, what have you, that offer free trials. But it's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take control of your subscriptions. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save about $720 a year with Truebill. And your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could literally save you thousands per year. Other thing I can tell you about is that, while free subscriptions turning into potential charges could be a small source of stress, in general, you don't want to let stress of daily life weigh on your body. And whether you're an elite athlete or someone like me just trying to get through the day tension-free, Theragun can help. Theragun is the handheld percussive therapy device that releases your deepest muscle tension using a scientifically collaborated combo of depth, speed, and power. And it's as quiet as an electric toothbrush. The Gen 4 Theragun doesn't just feel good. It goes to the source of the pain by releasing tension using Theragun's signature percussive therapy, which goes 60% deeper than vibration alone. Whether you want to treat your muscle tension from working out or an injury or just the stresses of everyday life, there is no substitute for the Theragun Gen 4. Try Theragun for 30 days starting at only $199. Go to Therabody.com/LockedOn right now and get your Gen 4 Theragun today. That's Therabody.com/LockedOn. Therabody.com/LockedOn. On tomorrow's Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we will once again preview the Grizzlies game against the Dallas Mavericks. For the second time in less than 5 days, the Grizzlies will be playing a big divisional matchup, a 6th straight win in a row. We'll explain how huge that will be in really cementing the Grizzlies into a very favorable place throughout the rest of December and heading into the new year. Plus, 250 games into Dillon Brooks' career, how he is standing out among other Grizzlies in franchise history. We'll look at that and much more on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So the Grizzlies have now won 5 games in a row. Over that stretch, they have been a top 5 offense in the NBA, and they've been a top 5 defense. Now, let's qualify this, as Nick Angstad and myself did a little bit on yesterday's episode of Locked On NBA. Yes, the Grizzlies have played, they haven't played necessarily a murderer's row when it comes to the NBA. They've played some teams that they were supposed to beat, especially when you consider several of those teams were without significant talents. Now, the Grizzlies themselves were out without significant talents as well, but this was an opportunity for the Grizzlies to show that they were the better teams in many of these games, and that's exactly what they have done. But something else that stands out to me is that this, and I talked with it about Matt Hurtlicka a bit yesterday when I on the podcast that I shared with him. We talked a bit about it's hard to remember that this Grizzlies team right now is a bottom 5, is one of the 5 youngest teams in the NBA. And, I talked about it yesterday. I talked about how last year when the Grizzlies had a stretch like they're having right now, it was due to the play of Jonas Valanciunas, Kyle Anderson, Grayson Allen, players who were closer to their prime and who were having career years, at least at the time. And that this year, it's a bit better because the career years, the great starts, the overall higher level of plays in more featured roles are coming from a Desmond Bane, from a Jaren Jackson Jr., and others, players that not only are to help now, but to also are going to be a big part of the future. But the other thing that really stands out to me is that it also shows that the logical thing, and though many of us may not have, acknowledged it, is that it also shows that the Grizzlies simply needed an adjustment period for the start of this season. And it makes sense. It took a month to 5 weeks for the Grizzlies to really find their groove. I mean, think about it. You had Jaren coming back from injury, wanting to get into the groove of playing 25 to 30 minutes a night. That was going to take an adjustment. You had Kyle Anderson, who was no longer a starter, adjusting back to the bench. That was going to be an adjustment. Desmond Bane and DeAnthony Melton being in more featured roles. An adjustment. Steven Adams being with the new team, the team learning him, Steven Adams learning the team. That was going to be an adjustment. The team playing without their emotional leader in Dillon Brooks for much of the start of the season. And then once he came back, him figuring out how to be able to play his role with a more featured Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson healthy, and without Ja. that was going to take an adjustment period. And so that's the thing that stands out, is that, yes, while the Grizzlies have certainly had high highs and low lows, there's been a lot of inexplicable struggles. The defense struggling like it did certainly was frustrating to see. I think at the end of the day, this doesn't explain everything. Yes, the Grizzlies certainly could have played better, but I think it was simply adjustments. That's one thing that stands out. It took time for a very young team, for many of the players on the roster to adjust to new roles, many of the players on the roster to adjust to how to play without reliable sources that they had in Dillon Brooks, and not having Jonas and not having Grayson, and getting adjusted to new players like Steven Adams. But it's not just the younger players that had to adjust. Steven Adams likely had to adjust as well. He needed to acclimate himself to the strengths of his teammates and also figure out where exactly I fit in the offensive scheme of things. It seemed like that one way he could fit would be as a facilitator, and he continues to do that from time to time. But over the past 2 games, we're really starting to see that the acclimation period and the adjustment period are starting to pay off. For the last 2 games, in big moments against Dallas in Dallas and Miami in South Beach, Steven Adams had a double-double. It was the first time that he had had back-to-back double-doubles since March of 2021. Only the 4th time this calendar year Steven Adams has had back-to-back double-doubles. But the thing about it is that that adjustment period I talk about, that acclimation period I talk about, it shows in the fact that Steven Adams is doing it in different ways. I've mentioned it. Many around the Memphis media have mentioned it. The great thing about Steven Adams is that he can get offensive rebounds, just like Jonas Valanciunas, or among the best in the NBA. Steven Adams arguably is the best offensive rebounder in the NBA this year. The issue is that it seemed at times as if when it just made sense to put the shot back up for a high percentage look at 2 or to get to the free throw line, Steven Adams would pass back out, and it'd be a bit frustrating. For a man his size, being able to put the ball up into the basket after getting an offensive rebound, being so close to the rim, it just wasn't happening as often as we think it should have, and as often as many of us have been, used to seeing with Jonas Valanciunas. But on Saturday night, that's exactly what he did. Steven Adams was able to make a key difference by getting offensive rebounds and putting them back in the basket. But last night, it wasn't that. It was Steven Adams playing his role in the half-court offense and making the most of it by getting good shot after good shot, clean look at the basket after clean look at the basket. The Miami Heat last night, going into the game last night, the Miami Heat were the top team in the NBA in terms of guarding 2-point shots. They gave up the lowest opponent's 2-point field goal percentage in the league. A big reason why that was because of Bam Adebayo, who Miami did not have. But the thing that the Grizzlies were able to do is that they were able to show their resourcefulness getting into the paint. It wasn't just Dillon driving or Bane driving. It was them being able to, when that was taken away from them, especially with Dillon, when that was taken away from them, they were able to dish down low to Steven Adams, who adjusted, who got out of the way of the rim, found a soft spot in the dunker spot on the baseline, and was there for an easy pass to get plenty of clean looks at the basket. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you hardly ever saw that. So that's what stands out about Steven Adams, and the fact that he is just the latest example of a logical acclimation and adjustment period that the Grizzlies were going through. Now that Steven Adams is used to playing with his teammates, you can see the chemistry building, much like the chemistry built in the past between Jonas and his teammates. That chemistry is starting to build between Steven Adams and his teammates, and you're now seeing the full breadth of what Steven Adams can offer. It's not just the fact that he's, one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. Now the only offensive rebounder who has had 8 offensive rebounds in 3 different games in the NBA, also up there among the league leaders in offensive rebounds as a whole. But now he's becoming a true scoring threat, playing off the drives of the perimeter players of the Grizzlies and being able to find easy ways to get baskets. Not only that, but also the putbacks through the offensive rebounds. So Steven Adams, much like Tyus Jones, is a veteran who is finding his groove and stepping up and delivering. And of course, you want to say that with Ja being out, he also is someone that just realized there was no other choice. He had to step his game up. But I really do think he's yet another example of the fact that once the Grizzlies got past the first month, 5 weeks of the season, where everybody was trying to adjust to new roles, trying to adjust to each other, the team was waiting for it to have its complete team together. Once they got about 20 games in and they really started learning more about each other, chemistry really started to develop between this team. You're seeing it pay off because night in and night out, this Grizzlies team is having someone different step up in a supporting role, but they're consistently doing it as well. And Steven Adams having his 2 best games in a Grizzlies uniform, and now truly seeming like, despite just being a rebounding force, he could be both a scoring force, and plus his defense is getting better as well. An overall better and more effective Steven Adams seems like it could certainly be in place moving forward, and that is a great development to complement Jaren and the rest of the Grizzlies as we head on into the season. So a great development by Steven Adams, playing his best basketball over the past 2 games for the Grizzlies this season. A lot of it had to do with just taking time for him to adjust, but also overall, the Grizzlies continuing to be resourceful and expanding on what's known about a player and making more of him once he gets acclimated to the team. Steven Adams' rebounding has always been there. Now his improved defense and his overall resourcefulness as a scoring option has certainly stepped up as well, and it's doing it at a great time. But along with the Grizzlies now getting past their adjustment period and game in and game out, having someone else step up to support Bane, Dillon, and Jaren, the Grizzlies defense also obviously is finding its groove. Yes, without a doubt, one of the big reasons why is because of the schedule that they're playing. But the other thing that stands out is a little bit less bad luck and some good health are finally making their impact for the Grizzlies on defensive end as well. I'll explain that in just a moment. But the other thing that I want to discuss with you is that while Dillon Brooks being back and Steven Adams' improved play were a boost last night, what about Boost Mobile? That's correct. You listen to podcasts for the power of knowledge. You switch to Boost Mobile for the power of saving money. Get 3 unlimited data lines for $30 a month per line and a free 5G phone when you switch, so you can get the latest episodes of your podcast. All in America's largest 5G networks. More power to save. Boost Mobile. Free phone limited to new customers and 1 per line. Additional restrictions apply. Offers, coverages not available everywhere for all phones, networks. See boostmobile.com for details. So obviously tomorrow on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we're going to discuss another critical game for the Grizzlies against the Dallas Mavericks. How a win will really put the Grizzlies in a favorable place moving forward into the next year. And also looking at Dillon Brooks, 250 games into his career, how he's really setting himself apart as being one of the most accomplished Grizzlies in franchise history. But of course, we talk about the Grizzlies against Dallas. It was Desmond Bane having a great night, Tyus Jones supporting him. Last night, Desmond Bane having another great night. Dillon's all-around game supporting him. Steven Adams stepping up. Especially on offense, the Grizzlies are consistently finding different sources that are going to step up to support each other to get the job done. But defensively is really where the key improvements have happened. That's where the Grizzlies have made the big impact, the big change to be able to get these 5 wins in a row and play at the level that they're playing. Being able to create turnovers, defensive activity. Last night, the Grizzlies were excellent in the lane, making their hands active, getting their hands on passes, deflecting shots, getting blocks, making it hard for the Heat to get into a rhythm early on. All those things made a key difference as to why the Heat really struggled last night on offense. But a couple of key statistics that I think are really helping the Grizzlies rely on the fact that the Grizzlies are finally running into some positive regression. They're finally looking at a stretch where less bad luck is impacting them. And also, the simple return of Dillon Brooks and the Grizzlies having their 2 best defenders play with each other is making all the difference in the world. For one, before November, up until November 14th, which would have been the Grizzlies' first 14 games of the year, on wide open three-point shots. Grizzlies opponents were making 41.5% of their wide open three-point shots. That was the second highest total in the league. That's how unlucky the Grizzlies were. Their opponents were the second best in the league at making wide open three-point shots. And the thing is that was just a bit of unluck. Shots were falling at an unexpectedly high rate against the Grizzlies, and they were making the Grizzlies defense look worse than it actually was, to be honest. Well, thankfully, since November 16th, or at least over the Grizzlies' past 10 games, they now are 25th in terms of opponents hitting wide open three-point shots. In the Grizzlies' first 14 games, opponents were hitting 41.5% of their wide open threes. Over the past 10 games, Grizzlies opponents are hitting 35.5% of their wide open threes. That's a significant drop-off and an expected one when it comes to positive regression. Yes, the Grizzlies certainly did struggle defensively, but the fact that they were running into opponents consistently hitting high percentage threes or a high percentage of their threes didn't help matters at all. Well, now things have kind of fallen off a bit as it was expected. That shot variance is starting to normalize, as Matt Herdlicka and others had mentioned, and that really has helped the Grizzlies' cause in terms of being able to know that luck is a bit on their side more than it was to go along with better efforts. But speaking of better efforts, it's simply the return of Dillon Brooks and getting him back to couple with the overall improvements in consistency of Jaren Jackson Jr. Because with Dillon now in place on the perimeter, you've got him guarding the opposition's primary scoring threat on the perimeter. That allows everybody else to fall in place with the knowledge that they also have Jaren Jackson Jr. being there to deter activity in the paint, being there to protect the rim, overall being someone that down low on the second unit of the defense will be doing his job. With Dillon Brooks and Jaren Jackson Jr. on the court together in terms of half-court defense, in 447 possessions this year, the Grizzlies are allowing opponents to score 95.4 points per 100 possessions. That's in the 99th percentile of all defensive lineups. In other words, when the Grizzlies have Dillon Brooks and Jaren Jackson Jr. on the court together this year, defensively, they become one of the best half-court defenses in the NBA. Numbers show that. That's how good they become. One of the best half-court defenses in the NBA. But while with Dillon and Jaren, they're in the 99th percentile on half-court defense, when Jaren and Dillon are off, and this is over 731 possessions, the Grizzlies allow 121 points per 100 possessions on half-court defense. In other words, that's second percentile in the NBA. So while those numbers certainly are eye-opening, here's the simple truth. With Dillon and Jaren on the court, the Grizzlies have one of the best half-court defenses in the NBA. With both of them off the court, the Grizzlies have one of the absolute worst half-court defenses in the NBA. But that's the impact that those two players make. And the thing is that with both healthy, you know that they're going to be on the court together, or they should be most of the time, in high leverage and closing situations. But that's the impact of Dillon being back. That's the impact of Jaren being healthy and continuing to improve. You've got a duo where Dillon takes care of the primary threat on the outside and overall helps set everybody else in their roles. And then you've got Jaren taking care of the inside towards the rim. And you've got two layers of leaders who effectively make everybody around them better when it comes to defense. The Grizzlies are getting better at stopping initial dribble drive opportunities from their opposition, and they're getting better at, not allowing so many points to be scored in the paint, and that is making it to where they're not having to overhelp, and they can do a better job of guarding the three. But that just shows how NBA defenses work. Yes, it takes effort. Yes, it takes skill, but it also takes a bit of luck. And lo and behold, a very, very eye-opening development, just a trailblazing, groundbreaking truth, it also helps to have your best defensive talents on the court. That's what matters, and it's making a difference for the Grizzlies. So I'm not sitting here saying that the Grizzlies all of a sudden are going to be a top 5 defense moving forward, but numbers do suggest that when Dillon and Jaren are on the court together, the Grizzlies have the potential to operate at that level. And now take that, take the emergence of Bane, take the improvement of Tyus and Steven Adams, all those different things, and consider the fact that this is all going on without Ja. Throw Ja back into the mix. Maybe you don't have people being as effective at times with Ja being back in the mix, but you certainly have them being better than they are right now with Ja in the mix as well. The whole point is this, is that with a little bit less bad luck and a little bit more health on their side, once the Grizzlies get Ja back as well as they're playing now, there actually is another level or two up for this Grizzlies potential. And that's truly exciting with where the Grizzlies could find themselves if they can get a few more wins over the month of December against quality teams going into the new year. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about tomorrow. A game versus the Mavericks. If the Grizzlies can get a win against a Mavericks team in the FedEx Forum, the Mavericks will be on the road for the second night of a back-to-back. If the Grizzlies can find themselves a sixth win in a row, how much better of a position they'll be in the Southwest Division and in the playoff race for the new year. What can they do to get that done against Dallas? And also looking at how Dillon Brooks is really separating himself among the most notable names in franchise history, 250 games into his career. That and much more on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. And make sure, after you make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day, check out the Locked On NBA podcast as your second listen. Can't thank you enough for joining us. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You could find me at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz. Wherever you choose to listen, that's where we will be. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope you have a great day. Hopefully, we'll continue to talk about another win for the Grizzlies later on this week after they face the Mavericks tomorrow night. Until then, we'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.